delivering, conducting audit on site, she has also got a lot of experience in developing and suggesting tailor-made programs for our clients. And her experience is across different industry and categories. Next slide, Tia. And before Tia starting her presentation, I would like to quickly introduce European Consumer Product Assurance. At European CPH, we support our customer of all sizes around the world to identify and minimize risk so that we can protect them from potential loss for non-compliance. Next slide. And globally, we are operating in more than 35 locations with around 300 full-time inspectors and auditors. Next slide. And we assist our customer to have assurance throughout their whole supply chain with our product inspection, factory audit, and training solutions. We can go to the next slide. In terms of audit, we are the full member firm of Association of Professional Social Compliance Auditors. Pierre will be explaining a little bit more on this ASCA program in her presentation. And we are also approved to do social audits for DSCI, ICS, SMITA program, SLCP, and RAP. Moving on, next slide. And training is also one of our strengths apart from product inspection and factory audit. So of course we offer live training, but it is difficult to arrange live training because of the situation now. So we have been conducting a lot of virtual training, and also we have set up an online learning platform so that our students can learn anytime from anywhere. So we can move to the next slide. So from now on, I'll be handing back to Tia so she can explain first about the supply chain and then explain how to interpret the social audit report. Over to you, Tia.
Thank you, Fiona. Hi, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for taking time out to be with us today. So before we delve into looking at a social audit report, I'm just going to take a moment to look at social compliance overall. And in this particular space, what we're talking about is looking at working conditions within a supply chain. Now, a supply chain is a network of companies, people, etc., that come together to produce a product or provide a service to the end client. So if we take a quick look at this drawing, this image, and let's say we take a humble bag of apples that we buy at a supermarket. It might sound really humble, but if you think about the supply chain, you have the actual farmers, the pickers, the packers, the storage warehouses, distributors, transport, and then the stores. And if you think about a more complex product, such as a mobile phone, there are lots of components that go into it, so it will have a far more complex supply chain. And when we talk about social compliance, some of the aspects that we look at are things like laws and regulations, child labour, forced labour, health and safety, wages, working hours, etc. And the audit that we produce from this can help a business to make a decision. It sometimes also helps investors to make their decisions. Okay, so risks of having non-compliances in audits. Well, in this day and age, negative press. I mean, there's a lot of social media, a lot of, it's very easy to see what's happening in the world. You may recall last year when the UK went into lockdown, the media got into the whole incident where there was modern slavery or similar issues within the UK textile industry, and that story came out really quickly. What happened was then people were charged under certain laws, and subsequently that led to loss of business. So a risk can lead to a lot more. Okay, so now we're going to focus on the actual social audit reports. So some of the things we're going to look at are what's in a social audit, what an audit report is, key factors that we should be focusing on when we look at a report. We're going to talk through ratings and our aligned approach. Okay, so social audit. This is essentially a fact-finding exercise. So as an auditor, I look at multiple types of information. This can come from worker interviews, management feedback, site observation. This is where I walk around the site and take a look at what's going on, and testing of records such as wages, ID, and contracts. So let's say I've just conducted the audit and this now gets put into a report. So what is the report? It is essentially a presentation of the information, the facts that I've gathered at the site. And depending on the type of audit I've conducted, the report may have an overall result. So the image you can see there on the far right, it has a factory score. That is the Eurofins own social compliance audit. The other image there you can see is of the SMETA audit, and that doesn't have an overall score. So the type of audit you have may determine this. You will also note that there's other things in this. You will find there will be information per section. So, for example, for health and safety, there will be a narrative that describes what I've seen at the site, what records I've checked, and there'll be the finding or the identified condition, so to speak. So maybe I'll spot that there was fantastic examples within that section, and that's what would be there. If there were non-compliances, there would be the appropriate rating, if applicable, and there will be the standard or the law that it's breached. Okay, so key factors, and these are the real critical things when looking at an audit report. So this may sound really silly, but a simple thing like matching up the name and the address is really important. Now, when I used to work in the textile supply chain, I recall receiving a report, and the report said the factory's name was, let's say, ABC, but having spoken to the manager, and they referred to the factory as XYZ. So it's always worth checking something as simple as that. Now, in that case, it turned out that the manager had two factories, and he was talking to me about one, but was actually going to use the other for my production. Timing is really important. Now, some reports have a shelf life, so some may only be valid for a year. Some have a 2-year cycle, but it's always best to check in with the end client, because they may accept a longer sort of shelf life. Some may say no, we will be really strict and have only 1 year. Historically I've received reports that were really, really old. Now, the issue with this was since the audit, the factory had actually moved premises. So that meant that the whole of the health, safety and environment section were now void. But then on further investigation, what I found out was that because the move was so far away, a lot of the workers had chosen not to go. And what that did was it meant that things like the wages, the working hours section, the contract section, etc., they also carried no value for me. So having a look at that is really, really important as well. Now, the audit party, so who's the audit conducted by? This is important. So if we look at first party, for example, let's say I own the factory and I conduct the audit myself. I'm probably going to be a little bit biased about it. So it's not going to be the best of reports. But there's also second party. So this is, let's say, where I own the factory, but my colleague Fiona is the vendor who sells the product to the end client, and she does the audit. Now, that's going to be a better report. But then you have third party audits. This is where an independent audit body, such as Eurofins, comes to audit you. This is completely independent, and the audit body has no bias. The audit should also be conducted by somebody who is qualified to do so. And the ideal thing to look for here is an APSCO registered auditor. I will talk about APSCO in detail a little later on, and I'll explain the importance of that. Another factor to consider is the content in the report. There have been times historically where a client has asked me if I can go into a site and just look at wages and working hours. So I've had to ignore the health and safety, contracts, etc., etc. Now, while it suited that client, um, that report would be useless for another client, because the factory may share it, but the other client's going to say, well, where's the rest of this report? It's just blank. So have a quick look at the content. If there are scope limitations, it may not carry the right value for you. Some other factors to think about. So some reports have a summary section, and this is really a snapshot of the entire audit, and it can highlight any issues to you. So for example, if I wrote the summary and I wrote that there was forced labor on site, you could quickly just turn to the relevant page and have a look at the detail that I've captured under that section. It's just a quick way of drawing out the important things for yourselves. As a company, you may have things that have value to you. So you may want to search for key phrases like bullying, forced labor, child labor, etc. So you can do so. And also, one of the other things you should look at is the non-conformance and the detail contained within that. It should contain as much as possible of the 5 W's and 1 H, which is the what, who, where, when, how, and why. And of course, it will also state the relevant law or the ethical code that we've raised the finding against. Now, I've put that into practice. If you look on the right-hand side of the screen, you've got the same non-compliance, but written in 2 different ways. So the first, sample A, is that one fire exit was found to be blocked. It's pretty simple, but it's not enough detail. So if we rewrite that, considering that we need to put in a lot more information, it suddenly becomes one fire exit in the packing area was found to be blocked by pallets. There was a second fire exit in the area. This was clear. At any given time, there are a maximum of 3 workers in the area. Now, this suddenly changes the value of that non-compliance. It tells you, the report reader, what's happening in the area, that there was a second fire exit available, and there's only a minimum amount of workers there. Okay. Earlier I mentioned we'll look at ratings. Now, ratings, this is an interesting one. As an auditor, I never got to learn about ratings, and there was a reason behind this. So we don't tell auditors what value most items carry, whether something is major or minor. And the reason for that is the program writers do not want auditors to have that in their heads, otherwise it does impact how they audit. So this information is kept away from the auditors. However, certain critical points, like what's up on the screen right now, is given to the auditors. So each client has a list of things that they class as critical or zero tolerance issues. And these are some of the things that we tend to find. So things like child labor, forced labor, some form of harassment or abuse, non-payment of wages. And on the next one, we have life-threatening health and safety issues. Now, that's an interesting one, because if I go into a site and they have, let's say, 50 non-compliances under health and safety, I would just write 50 non-compliances up, because they may be small things. And although it looks like a lot, they may not be life-threatening. However, I recall going into a site and I went into the office first, and it was beautiful, clean, big, spacious, and I didn't think I'd have many issues. And then we walked onto the factory floor, and suddenly it was just a case of I could see issue after issue, but there weren't small enough issues. These were things that were life-threatening issues, and I had to refuse walking into that factory. I explained to the manager what was going on. I took pictures from where I was stood, and they agreed that there were issues there. So if it's life-threatening, it will be classed as a zero tolerance issue. There's also the other side to this, things that can happen to the auditor. So there's attempted bribery that would be classed as zero tolerance, and it would be confirmed to the end retailer. You also have access denied. So this is where I go to a site and I'm not allowed in. Now, I mentioned APSCA earlier. So APSCA is the Association of Professional Social Compliance Auditors. They set the standards for auditor competencies. They also include training requirements and exams for auditors. So there's a set of 3 exams that every auditor has to do. it also defines the standards for audit bodies. So what an audit body should be, the processes we have to go in place. They monitor every audit body closely. And Eurofins is an APSCA member, and we ensure all of our auditors are trained to the highest level and that they are registered with APSCA. So now I'm just going to hand you back to Fiona.
Yes, thank you, Tia. So within a rather short 10 to 15 minutes, Tia has given a very introductory information on how to interpret the social audit report. So in fact, this is one of the questions that we have received quite frequently from our clients when we are talking about social compliance and social audit to them. So if you think that Tia's sharing is interesting and you would like to learn more, we are actually offering also a virtual training that can be customized to your company list or to your team's list, delivered by Tia on 3 topics: on the responsible buying practice, managing modern slavery, and fundamental understanding of CSR/social auditing. If you're interested, you can just ping us anytime, and we'll have a sales to follow with you. So moving on to the next slide here. And here comes the question session. So I'll let Tia to take a little short break and just to confirm or assure all of you that the recording and this presentation file will be shared. But this will be sent out through this, yes, very long email address. This is the company policy. I can do nothing with it. So please make sure that you write this mailing address so you'll be getting the recording and the presentation file straight to your mailbox. And also just a little favor to ask for, after quitting the webinar system will pop up a short survey to ask you about the opinion of this session. I hope you will be able to spare like 2 or 3 minutes finishing it and let us know what you think about this session and let us know what you want to hear in the upcoming session as well. Right. So let's go back to the question slide here. Let's go back to the question slide here. Yes. Yeah. So here is the question section. So I have a first question.
Mm-hmm.
The first one is about, can you explain what is first, second, and third party audit?
Sure. So first party is like, let's say I'm the factory owner, but I do the audit myself. So that's first party. The issue you have with that is, of course, I'm going to be a little biased with regards to auditing my factory. Second party is where somebody from outside my organization, but still connected to my organization. So let's say, Fiona, if you are the vendor, the middleman who's selling to the brand, let's say you come and audit my factory. Whilst you have you will be independent of the factory, you still have a vested interest in the factory because you want my factory to come out looking really great, so that in the end your client will approach us. And then you have the third party. So that's somebody who's completely disconnected from the factory and from the end client. So this is somebody who's completely independent, and that's an audit body like Eurofins.
Okay. So another question. So you have mentioned you have found life-threatening risk in one of the factory audits with a family audit. So can you share one example of what are the life-threatening risks?
Okay, so with regards to, let's say, health and safety, so in this particular factory, I recall the entire factory floor having issues. So I walked in and I could see all these aisles, people moving about, walking, but it wasn't safe because there were items all over the floor. You could see that fire exits were blocked. The place was quite unhygienic. You could see the shelving wasn't so great. So, it looked like items were going to fall. And of course, if things fall onto people's heads, that could lead to to health issues, but it could also lead to death. There was that aspect. There's also the other aspect where I've been to a site and they've locked the doors while I'm in there. So, of course, if there was fire, I would have been trapped there, but workers would have also been trapped there. So you can have different sort of life-threatening issues when you go to sites. Sometimes, a site can be really spick and span, but it may be the machinery, or the equipment that they're using, or it may be the product they're making. So certain cosmetics, they are made in factories which come under what we call DESIR, or explosive atmosphere regulations. And if we were to accidentally take a photograph that has the camera has a flash on it, it could set the entire factory off, and it would blow up completely, there and then. So yeah, there are lots of sort of different situations, and each factory you have to gauge differently.
Okay. And the next one, what are the usual follow-up actions if I have a report with critical NC? What should I do with my supplier?
Okay, if something is critical, it is worth, first of all, if you are the client, the retailer, the brand, speak to your factory, understand why it's happened, because they may not even realize it's an issue. And then it's a case of working out an action plan. Now, if it's something like the fire doors are locked, you need to tell them they have to immediately unlock them. So the short-term action would be something like, make sure you arrive there before the workers get there and ensure all the doors are unlocked. Long term, there also needs to be some training and some guidance around that. So, explain to them in the training what the law says, what action should be taken, that all workers should know where the fire exits are, the fact that fire exits should be unlocked every day. Perhaps have somebody walk around to check that they are actually unlocked. But it really is dependent on what the NC is. If it's child labor, for example, if I was to go into an audit and find child labor, I have to stop the audit there and then, and I would call the client and say, this is what I'm looking at right now. And then, of course, it's for the client to have a child labor remediation policy and work with the site to protect that child, and to make sure that that child is not harmed in any way, to make sure the child receives education. If it's something to do with, let's say, where wages are under minimum wage, under the legal wage, the immediate action is to start paying the legal minimum wage, but the long-term action is to historically go back and look at where this mistake happened and to pay that amount back to the workers. So it really is dependent on what the critical NC is.
Right. And the next thing, this one is an interesting question. Is there anything around COVID setup of a factory in the social audit?
Sorry, can I ask you to repeat that, please?
Is there anything around COVID setup of a factory in the social audit?
Sorry, Fiona, I'm struggling to hear you.
So, I mean, in the social audit, is there anything around COVID setup?
Okay. Is there anything around COVID setup? So COVID gets classed as a health and safety, and certain clients have already asked us to include a section on health and safety. So like I mentioned earlier, in the report under health and safety, there is a narrative of this is what I've seen at the site. And then there will also be, these are the documents or the records that I've checked. Now, within that narrative, I would add that the site has implemented, one-way systems. There are hand sanitizer stations throughout the site. I would also, when I speak to workers, I would ask them what's been done to make it a safe working environment. Now, as an auditor, it's important for me to understand what the local law says. Now, I'm based in the UK, and I'm quite familiar here with what the law says and with the government guidance. If it was one of my colleagues in China, they would obviously follow the law out there. And it's really basically for me to check that that is what's going on at the site. and it will definitely be captured in every single report. So anything that's been done from last March and is continuing to happen right now, any audit in that window will have will mention COVID at some level in the report.
Okay. Another question. So we have you have presented clearly on the zero tolerance issues. And what about any positive practices that will be usually emphasized in the report?
Sorry, what practices?
Positive practices that can be mentioned in the report.
Okay.
Anything positive about it? Yeah.
Good question. So as an auditor, when I start an audit, I will always speak to the management and say, look, positive practices or good practices are really hard to spot. So please show me the information. So whether it's documents, whether it's something on the site tour, etc., please show that to me. And most of the auditors will do the same. And when we walk around the site, we do stop to look at notice boards, and our notice boards are good, always have some form of good examples. It may be information about bonuses to workers. It may be, things like Employee of the Month scheme. When we speak to workers, we will ask them about the positive things within a company. But I'll be honest with you guys, including myself, if somebody was to ask me, I forget, especially if you've been working at a company for a long time. It's hard to draw that information from workers. So it's really important that management show us. We do capture that in reports. We will put under every section, there will be a section that says, so let's say, again, we go back to the health and safety. So here here's the narrative, here's what I've seen, all the records I've checked. There will be a section for the non-compliances found, and underneath that, there'll be a section for all the good practices I found. So a good one for health and safety is sometimes you find local councils or local government offices have schemes for health and safety awards, and I would capture that in the report. Let's say under wages section, there may be things like the company pays bonuses. So this may be time and attendance bonus, this may be a annual bonus, a Christmas bonus, or there may be things like employees are able to buy extra leave. It can really vary from company to company, but we do see some fantastic stuff. And there's also the positive examples where you've got companies who do things for the community. So I visited a textile factory that knits jumpers. And what they do is where they've got things that are slightly damaged that cannot go into the into store, they are delabeled, so you can't identify them, and they're given to charities. For people who are living on the streets, etc. So at least they have something warm to wear. So yeah, we do look at them, and they are definitely captured in the reports.
Okay, very lively illustration. And so let's take the two last questions. We have two more questions on hand. The second last question is, you have showed several different social audit programs on your slide. So what is the difference among these programs? I guess the audience is asking about the SMITA, the RAP, SLCP, and the BSEI program.
Yep. So most social compliance audits focus around the same sort of thing. So where we looked at one of the earlier screens where we had it stated the sort of subject matters that we look at in an audit. So child labour, forced labour, health and safety, environment, working hours, wages, etc. All of these audits cover those aspects. Now, within each audit, there may be some specific things that an audit looks for. So within SMITA, you've got a section about management systems, but it's management systems around the particular audit standard. And within BSEI, you've got management systems, and again, it's similar, but it's around the BSEI code of conduct. But then the report looks completely different. So you will have the SMITA one is almost like a book. It just captures everything there, whereas the BSEI will view differently, and it will have a grading. But overall, all the reports capture the same information. That's the key here. It's just really what the end client wants as to which determines what type of audit we conduct. And So let's say in the last 7 years in the UK, I have not conducted a single BSCI audit because the British clients that I've worked with have not wanted BSCI audits. They've tended to go for the SMETA audit. But if you look across Europe, excuse me, if you look across Europe and Asia, people prefer BSCI audits. And so it really does depend on the end client. But overall, the audits do capture very similar information. So it's really down to you, the end client, to determine which one you want.
Okay, thank you, Tia. Very brief but very in-depth, very brief overview of the different programs. So here comes our last question. Do you see a change in trend or improvement in social audits along the way when you do the social audits?
Oh, yes, definitely. I mean, from the days when I started, and believe me, that was a long time ago, to now, there is a definite change. So where audits used to be quite basic and a lot of them used to be quite a tick box exercise. Is this in place? Is this in place? We are now investigating more. We are now triangulating information. So, for example, if I go into a site and I'm looking at wages, I'm not just looking at the pay slips. I'm speaking to workers to gain information. I'm speaking to managers to gain information. Then I'm also looking at things like the working hours, etc. So I'm joining several pieces of evidence together to get my answer. And audits are becoming more and more complex for the auditor to perform because there's a lot more required of us and there's a lot more in-depth information that's required of us. And that boils down again to the end client, but also people, the investors in businesses, because they want to know more detailed information before they make the decisions about businesses. So yes, there is a change. There's definitely higher demand because I can see year on year we get more and more busy. But now we also have APSCA, which is really great because it means that people are choosing to go to audit bodies who work with APSCA. So you're seeing a certain quality about the audit as well, and the quality is improving day on day as well.
Okay, thank you, Tia. Thank you so much for your time, and we are going to come to an end of our webinar. So let's move to the second last slide. Okay, so here is Tia contact information. If you have any questions regarding the webinar content, feel free to reach out to her at this email or at this phone number. She is located in UK. And if you really want to, I have some people asking me about the prices of the virtual training that I've mentioned before the questions section. If you want to get the information, just give us an email anytime. Thank you very much for joining our webinar today, and I hope to see you again in our next webinar. Take care, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.